Picture a weathered settlement clinging to the Oregon Trail's edge. The air carries pine sap, animal musk, and harsh tobacco smoke. Around a crude platform are boards balanced on supply boxes, desperate men clustered together. Weathered faces, vacant stares, aching loneliness carved into their features. This godforsaken place where human dignity came to die. A figure in faded blue cloth and tarnished lawman's star pounds his gavel against the wooden post. Final offering today, his voice booms across the crowd. Anonymous female. Face concealed since departure from Missouri. Claims she will work hard and follow orders. $2 opens the bidding, which fool has courage or whiskey enough for this gamble. Cruel laughter erupts like thunder, could be cursed beneath that covering. Someone hollers, "We're dead already." Adds another voice. Better to wed the cloth itself. Men hawk and spit, some drifting away while others linger, elbowing companions. Anticipating someone desperate enough to bid, upon the makeshift stage, she remains motionless, no shoes covered. In dust, wrists secured with weathered rope, the rough fabric shrouding her head hangs loose and stained, knotted firmly at her throat. Only her rapid, shallow breathing reveals her terror. Her bound fingers flex and contract in silent distress. Worthless if she won't even talk, the auctioneer complains. Nobody moves forward. Long moments drag past. Then the gathering divides like a parted sea. From behind emerges a towering man. Strong shoulders beneath work-worn canvas, features shadowed by a weathered dark hat. His boots carry forest mud, his clothes bear sweat stains, and his hatchet handle is bound in worn leather. A soul who'd spent more years among timber than people. $2, he states simply. The stillness descends like falling snow. The auctioneer squints suspiciously. "You certain about this, stranger?" In my words. "Stand firm." His tone stays level, neither angry nor eager, just resolute. Several men chuckle nervously. "Must be truly lonesome." The auctioneer swallows hard. "You haven't seen your purchase." The stranger glances toward the covered woman, still as stone. Beneath her shroud, "I'm not purchasing appearance," he responds softly. "I'm wedding a human soul. Even nature holds its breath. You'll mockery this time." "Your identity," the auctioneer mumbles. "Silas Boone. Occupation, timber harvester, Northridge Settlement." Records are scratched onto paper. Witness here that Silas Boone, Oregon Territory resident, enters legal matrimony before the Almighty and these gathered souls. He thrusts documents toward Silas, who signs without hesitation. Turning to the woman, "Marriage is now lawful, miss. State your identity for documentation." The covering shifts slightly. Silence initially. Then incredibly soft, forcing listeners to strain forward. The voice emerges. Annabelle Crow. Silas goes rigid. The crowd presses closer. The official raises questioning brows, but continues. Silas's eyes flash wide momentarily before hardening again, fixed on that cloth. On the voice now echoing through his memory. 3 winters passed in blizzard darkness. Voice never forgotten. A name never heard until now. Suddenly the woodland silence. Crimson snow, firelight in that frozen shelter, everything floods back. He descends the platform deliberately, takes the woman's arm. Not harshly, not rushed, just firm enough to communicate safety. None interfere as they depart. Only creaking boots on planks and the whispered name trembling between them. The forest. Path and Annabelle Crow. The wilderness embraced them as they traveled, the pathway shrinking to mere threads of fallen needles and packed soil. Daylight faded beneath. Thick branches, sunbeams struggling through dense boughs as if uncertain whether to approach. Annabelle walked silently. The coarse fabric still concealed her head, drawn tight around her neck, edges dancing in the evening air. When wind caught it sideways, she instantly adjusted with both hands. Maintaining her concealment, Silas Boone moved ahead, guiding their old mule carrying meager supplies from the outpost. He never looked back or attempted conversation. He simply followed the trail, occasionally checking the trees as if listening beyond mere wind. Their silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was carved from different survival experiences. They reached the dwelling before nightfall. It's built from dark pine knot. Expansive but solid, sturdy, clean nestled against an earthen rise blocking harsh northern gusts. Stone chimney, woodpile beside the entrance. Rusty horseshoe nailed overhead. Silas opened the creaking door, stepping aside. "Choose your position," he said gently. "Nobody will place you anywhere again." Annabelle entered cautiously. Her movements showed wariness, but not weakness. The covering remained. Her steps made barely audible sounds across smooth wooden floors. Rather than sitting at the table, she crouched against the distant wall, back to the room. Hands resting on knees, wordless. Silas followed, placing firewood near the hearth, beginning work at the stove. No questions, no demands, only occasional sounds of shifting iron or boiling water. Aromas developed slowly. Warmth, richness, reality, something spiced with cinnamon, salted with smoked meat. He worked rhythmically as though he'd performed. This ritual countless times, Annabelle remained motionless. When food was prepared, Silas placed a wooden bowl nearby. She flinched slightly, but didn't turn. He sat at the table with his portion, neither hurrying nor staring. Minutes later, her muffled voice asked, "What is this dish?" Silas examined his bowl, stirring once. "I call it sustenance for the final survivor." A pause, then a quiet sound. Almost laughter, but suppressed, withdrawn. He continued, "Used to prepare it after exhausting days in the timber. Then I began making 2 portions, even when nobody would eat the second." She turned her head enough to glance sideways beneath the fabrics. Hem. On the chair beside him sat another identical bowl, steam rising. No other person present. Silas gestured toward it. "I prepared it for my wife after the war, after the forest took more than it gave. Simply acknowledging, I returned home alive." He paused. "Now I prepare it for you and her memory." Silence held. Fire crackled. Annabelle reached for her bowl slowly, hands trembling faintly, gripping the spoon to eat beneath the covering without removing it. She consumed everything carefully, one small bite at a time. That night, while Silas cleaned dishes in a tin basin, Annabelle remained by the wall, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, watching, wordless. But for the first time since their meeting, she wasn't shaking. Memories returned after the fire dimmed to steady embers, and supper remnants were cleaned away. Silas sat alone before the hearth. No lantern needed, firelight sufficed, casting long shadows dancing along log walls like silent ghosts. Outside, wind moaned through branches, long and low and familiar. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, letting warmth touch his face. But warmth wasn't all he felt. 3 years passed, the winter deeper than any before, cold that turned pine needles to glass and lungs to flame. He'd ventured too far north seeking timber, greedy for wood, stubborn with pride. Slipped on an icy slope, twisted. His leg tumbled into snowdrifts where no path existed. When snow covered his back, he'd stopped struggling, then hands rough, callus pulled, dragged him. He remembered agony, his body's jarring weight scraping against rocks. Then darkness. He awoke to flames in a small cave hidden behind ice. Curtains. Fire crackled and hissed nearby, and the smell, earthy, bitter, like boiled bark, filled his nostrils. Across from him sat a figure, a woman. Her face hidden beneath sackcloth tied carefully, identical to the one now in his cabin. She wore layered, scavenged wool and leather, boots stitched from scraps. Her hands moved precisely as she ladled steaming liquid into a tin cup. When she spoke, her voice was neither high nor low, only soft, measured, weary. "You need to know my identity," she said, "but I won't let you perish." He tried speaking, but no words came. "Drink this," she continued. "Pine bark and dried lichen. It'll help your fever." He remembered the taste bitter, but he drank. She'd bound his leg, set it against heated stones, maintained the fire through the night. He faded in and out, fighting cold pain, whatever dreams tried stealing him away. Upon waking, morning light blue and cruel shade was gone. Only the fire remained, low and guarded, and beside it, folded neatly, lay a cloth square embroidered, with purple flowers stitched in uneven thread no larger than a palm. A token, perhaps a message. He kept it, still carried it, folded in his coat pocket. Now, in the cabin behind him, sat a woman with the same voice, same gentle hands, same sackcloth covering, and a name, Annabelle Crow. He closed his eyes, leaning deeper into firelight. He needed no proof. He'd felt it the moment she spoke on that auction platform, not the name, the sound. The woman who'd saved him hadn't wanted recognition or acknowledgement. Here she was again, still hidden, still nameless. To the world, but not to him. He didn't tell her that night. He let memory live within him, a silent agreement between past and present. He glanced back toward the small shape huddled near the far wall, covering still on her head, back still turned. The same fear, same need to disappear. But this time, Silas thought she wasn't alone. Perhaps that was the beginning of something that could survive beyond winter. The forest held its breath come morning. Mist clung to roots, curling around tree bases like shy secrets. Soft wind passed through overhead needles, high and slow, as if reluctant to interrupt. Annabelle stepped outside alone. She moved quietly, arms folded across her middle, walking toward the tall pine standing sentinel at the clearing's edge. The covering still concealed her head, but her steps no longer wavered. Her spine was straighter, not proud, but no longer bent at the trees. Base she sat, turning her face slightly toward early sun cutting through branches. She reached up with trembling hands and loosened the knot behind her neck. The cloth slid up just enough to let her breathe open face to the wind. Her mouth, nose, a sliver of cheek. Not defiance a beginning. Silas saw her from the side yard, where he knelt beside a wooden basin, oiling his saw's teeth. He didn't rise or call out, but after a moment spoke low, steady, as if addressing the trees rather than her. I once got badly injured, deep winter, lost near Black Ridge, should have died there. His fingers moved over the blade, cleaning. But someone found me, pulled me into a cave, saved my life. Annabelle didn't turn. She wore a sack over her head, wouldn't give her name, barely let me see her hands. He paused, but I remember her voice. He turned his head slightly, not to face her directly, but to let his words carry fuller. Your voice sounds exactly like hers. Stillness, then a soft scratch of fabric sliding over skin. He didn't move, not even when he felt her eyes on him. When he finally looked up, she was staring straight at him. The sack lay in her lap. Her face wasn't deformed or monstrous. It was human, bearing a mark none could miss, a long curved scar running from her right temple to just above her jawline. Not fresh or bleeding, but deep, permanent, as though cruel. Frantic fingers had tried clawing something from her that wouldn't come free. She met his gaze, no longer hiding but not proud either. Only bared, her voice came whispered. The man who owned the boarding house where I worked told me I could keep a room if I gave extra. She swallowed. I refused. He didn't appreciate that. She looked down briefly, then back to Silas. He attacked me. I fought back, pushed him. He slipped, struck his head on the stove. She stared past him into memory. He died. I ran. Silas's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. They claimed I murdered him deliberately, that I seduced him, that it was premeditated. Her voice wavered. No witnesses. Nobody believed me. She looked at her own hands. They called me liar, temptress, killer. Silas stood, wiping his hands on cloth. Annabelle continued, tone low and even. They sold me off to pay his debts, passed me from hand to hand like livestock. They covered my face to make it easier, to make me nothing. She looked at the sack in her lap. I wore this so people wouldn't see me as poison, so they wouldn't see the scar and judge my worth before I even spoke. She looked up at him again, eyes glassy but fierce. I didn't ask for rescue. I didn't ask to be purchased. But I'm tired of hiding. Silas didn't step forward or touch her. He only nodded. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me." His voice was steady, warm, real. "Well, you didn't have to, but you did." She blinked hard, but no tears fell, only breath. And in that breath, something shifted. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't a shadow. She was a woman with a name, a story, and a face. Silas had seen all three and turned away from none. Gift of choice, the sun crept slowly through the forest the next morning, its light golden and tentative, spilling through the narrow window above the table. Dust motes spun lazily in the beam like tiny spirits dancing between wood-grain walls, blessing the quiet. Inside the cabin, the air was still not with fear anymore, but with the hush of understanding, like breath held after something fragile has been shared and carefully received. Annabelle had barely spoken since the day before, but she hadn't reached for the sack. She no longer pulled it over her head before sleeping, no longer kept it folded at her bed's foot like a shield awaiting battle. Her hair, tied and tangled from sleep, lay quietly against her shoulders as she rose from the cot. Her steps remained cautious, posture guarded, but something in her presence had shifted, something small. Like ground thawing beneath snow, she blinked at light pouring through the window and moved toward the table, expecting the usual coffee tin, wooden bowl she washed nightly, leftover spoon. Instead, she stopped short. Something new awaited her. A small mirror stood upright, silver-framed, aged at edges but polished to clarity. It leaned against a smooth pine wedge, angled perfectly to catch rising sun's light, so it would illuminate, not expose. Beside it hung a scarf sea-green silk, slightly faded in parts, but soft and carefully folded, like it had been treasured. Once, maybe still was. No note, no gesture, pointing toward it, just the mirror and scarf placed as if they'd always belonged to that table, as if she'd always been meant to find them. Annabelle stared at the objects for a long time. She didn't move. Initially, the stove fire had gone low, and only crackling old pine and occasional creaking overhead beams filled the room. Outside, the forest began stirring, a jay's rustle in branches. Slow dew dripping from eaves. She approached the table slowly, as if afraid the mirror might reflect something unbearable. But when she reached it, she looked. What she saw wasn't new. She'd felt her face hundreds of times since her world cracked open. She knew the scar's ridges, the path it carved down her cheek like a brand that never asked permission. Her hand lifted, touching the mark lightly, the way one might touch a name etched in stone. It's familiar, inevitable, but this time under sun through clean glass. She didn't weep. The scar was still there, always would, but so was the woman behind it. Her gaze lingered, then shifted to the scarf. She lifted it with both hands. It slipped through her fingers like river water, cool, gentle, kind. Care was stitched into every fiber. She brought it to her head, not to hide the scar, but to shape what others would see, to soften the outline, to take control of her own image, not from shame, but from choice. The scarf settled into place like it belonged there. In the mirror, a new figure emerged. Not the hunted girl from the auction, not the ghost from the snowstorm, but a woman full, upright, still carrying what she'd lived through, and no longer buried by it. Behind her came a sound, soft boots on plank wood. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Silas stood in the doorway, one shoulder leaning against the frame. He'd entered wordlessly, as was his way, but the look on his face wasn't caution or surprise. It was quiet reverence. He tilted his chin toward the scarf that belonged to my wife, he said, voice steady. She wore it whenever she needed to feel like herself again. Annabelle's fingers brushed the silk near her temple. I thought maybe it would suit you too, he added. She turned slightly toward him, not flinching or defending. He held her gaze unwavering. Then with a voice as soft as moss and just as anchoring,
Nice.
He said, anyone who tries making you ashamed of what you've survived, a beat passed, and the blind don't get to judge beauty. Her throat tightened. Tears came slow but came, not sharp or desperate, but warm, cleansing. She looked at herself again, then gently reached out and laid her palm flat against the mirror. Meeting her reflection halfway, for the first time in a very long time, Annabelle Crow let herself be seen. The hunter arrives. The piece they'd carved in the woods didn't last unchallenged. It never did in these parts. Trouble came on horseback, riding alone beneath a sky bruised with stormlight. The man was lean, long-legged, his duster torn from trail wind and harsh miles. His eyes, gray, sharp, merciless, cut through the saloon, crowd like a blade through ripe hide. He called himself Cutter, and Cutter was no wanderer. He was a bounty hunter, the kind who could read tracks, like scripture, and smell secrets under boots. Rumor had drifted from the southern trail, a girl with a scar, hiding in the hills, face once covered, now showing. Blood on her hands, and a lumberman for protection. Cutter listened, then rode. By the time he reached the logging post near North Ridge, he was asking too many questions. He posed as a lost traveler, claimed he sought work with the timbermen, said he'd heard tell of a man named Boone who lived deep in the woods. Silas met him by chance near the supply shed. One look, and he knew not by words. Cutter was polite, measured, but the way he scanned the tree line, the stillness in his stance, it was a snake's stillness just before the strike. Later that evening, Silas returned to the cabin. His face was colder than the wind. "He's hunting you," he said simply. Annabelle didn't speak at first. She stood by the stove, stirring soup that had gone thin with memory. Her eyes were steady, but far away. Then wordlessly, she crossed the room, opened the wooden chest at the cot's foot, and pulled out the old sackcloth, folded neatly, untouched. Since the morning she'd shed it, she held it in her hands for a long time. "I'll wear it again," she said quietly. "One more time." Silas looked at her. "You don't have to." Her eyes met his. "This time I choose it. Not for shame, for strategy." They laid the plan together that night. Annabelle would ride east through the old fire road wearing the sack. Cutter would follow. He wouldn't resist a girl alone, scarred and covered, a ghost reborn. Silas would take the mountain pass, ride cross-country, and meet with the sheriff in town. If the plan worked, Cutter would follow her straight into the trap. And it did. At dawn, with sky barely blushing, Annabelle mounted Silas's second horse and rode out, sack tight over her head, heart hammering. She didn't tremble this time. She looked. Forward by sundown, Cutter had taken the bait, followed her deep into the eastern rocks. Where Silas waited with the sheriff and 2 men from the Ridge Patrol, Cutter drew first, but not fast enough. He was disarmed, bound, and thrown over the back of his own horse. Charged with unlawful pursuit, attempted assault, and intent to kill. Annabelle watched it all from the hilltop, her form still hidden beneath the sack. Only once Cutter was gone did she ride down. When she reached Silas, he stepped forward to help her down from the horse. She led him. Then slowly she reached up and untied the knot at the base of her neck. The sack slipped free. She folded it. Once, twice, then held it in both hands, staring at the fabric. Silas watched her, unsure of what she would do. She looked up at him, her expression quiet, but no longer afraid. "It saved me one last time," she said. "Not because it hid me, but because I used it." He nodded. "Then what will you do with it now?" She looked at the trees, at the fading trail, at the world she'd once moved through like a shadow. She folded the sack one more time and tucked it beneath her arm. "I'll keep it," she said softly, "not as a cage, but as proof." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Proof of what?" She smiled. "Now that even what was once my prison can become my shield if I choose it to." For the first time, there was light in her voice. Not the light of laughter, but the light of a woman who'd lived through the dark and now could name it. A witness steps forward. It was mid-afternoon when the knock came. A slow, uncertain tapping. Not the kind that demanded entry, but the kind that asked permission. Silas opened the cabin door to find a woman standing on the porch. Her dress was worn, travel-stained, and her boots carried the red dust of long roads. Her skin was dark, her posture straight, her eyes cautious but kind. She held her hat in both hands. "Name's Mavis Green," she said. "I used to work at the Ridley. House kitchen help? Cook mostly." Behind Silas, Annabelle stepped into the doorway. She froze when she saw the woman. Mavis took a step back, then stopped herself. "I heard you were up this way," she said quietly, "and I figured it was time I stopped being a coward." The wind rustled through the pines as silence stretched between them. "I saw what happened that night," Mavis said. "Saw him drag you into that back room, heard you scream, heard the crash. But I didn't speak up. I needed the job. I needed to eat." Annabelle's fingers tightened against the doorframe. "I'm not proud of that," Mavis continued, "but I can make it right now if you'll let me." Later, over tea at the table, Mavis recounted everything details. Only someone who'd truly been there could know. She described the bruises, the blood, the silence that followed. "I should have said it back then," she whispered, "but I'll say it now. We're telling the truth." With Silas's help, they wrote it all down. Mavis signed the affidavit in strong, careful penmanship. The letter was sealed and sent to the nearest judicial office by horseback courier. Weeks passed. The forest grew greener. Sky turned warmer. Then one morning, the sheriff rode up with a single envelope in hand. Silas opened it on the porch, read it twice before walking it inside. Annabelle took it in her hands. The words were few. Charges against Annabelle Crow dropped. Case closed. Warrant rescinded. She read them again and again. Then she walked outside, past the firewood pile, past the horses, and down to the tree line. She found the old pine where she'd once buried her sackcloth beneath. She sat at its base, running her fingers through the moss, breathing. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She just closed her eyes. And in a voice barely more than breath, she said, "For the first time in my life, I don't have to run." Justice had come up with trumpets, not with applause. Only with truth and the quiet strength of someone who'd finally decided to stand beside it. A new beginning spring came gently to the ridge. Trees once bare and brittle now wore soft buds, like promises waiting to bloom. Still rolled in at dawn, but thinner, lighter, as though even the fog had grown tired of hiding. Birds sang again. The river moved with purpose. The forest felt forgiving. Silas had been busy. Spare wood and quiet care, he built a modest canopy just outside the cabin, near the edge where wildflowers began claiming the grass. Nothing. Grand four upright beams, a simple arch draped in linen, but it stood strong like him. They invited only a few. Mavis came, smiling wide in a dress that didn't match but still suited her spirit. The old blacksmith from town brought a bottle of apple brandy. The shopkeeper's wife carried a basket of bread and a bouquet of mountain lavender. They weren't many, but they were enough. Inside the cabin, Annabelle stood before the small mirror Silas had left for her months ago. Her dress was plain muslin, hand-stitched, the color of cream. But it fit her perfectly because she'd made it herself with steady fingers and quiet nights. On her head she wore a veil. It was made from the sackcloth, the same one that had once hidden her shame, her fear, her name. But now it was something else. Silas had washed it, sun-dried it, and cut it with care. The edges were sewn with white thread, the kind used for mending old linen. And on the corners, embroidered in faint purple, were tiny wildflowers. Almost identical to the ones stitched into the handkerchief she'd once left behind in the snow. When she stepped out of the cabin, the forest fell still. Silas stood beneath. The wooden arch, hands folded, heart full. He'd trimmed his beard, polished his boots, and ironed the only shirt he owned without sap stains. But none of that mattered when he saw her. She moved slowly, like the earth had finally given her permission to be seen. And she was beautiful not because the veil covered the scar, because she'd chosen to wear it again on her terms. As she reached him, Silas took her hands. His voice was low, but every word was steady. No matter what covered your face, he said, you were always the woman I chose from the start. He paused, looking into her eyes. And now you're the woman I vow to stand beside to the end. Annabelle smiled, not with the caution of someone who'd been hurt, but with the peace of someone who'd finally healed. And I vowed the same, she whispered. There was no priest. No vows read from books, just them and the trees and the people who mattered most. And when they kissed, soft and sure, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the linen overhead. A few drops of rain fell, light as breath. Mavis leaned close to the blacksmith and said, never thought I'd see burlap turned into a wedding veil. Then after a beat she added, never thought it could be so beautiful. The blacksmith chuckled. Ain't. The sack, he said. It's what she turned it into. Later that evening, as fire crackled and laughter mingled with birdsong, Annabelle sat beside Silas on the porch. The veil lay folded in her lap. She ran her fingers across the embroidered edge. Funny, she said. This thing used to mean everything. I feared he looked over, and now, she smiled. Now it means everything I chose, Silas nodded. He reached over, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat that way until the stars came out. In the forest, once their prison, now held them like home. Epilogue end, so beneath the towering pines in a vale once born of shame. Annabelle Crow and Silas Boone found what so many had lost on the frontier. Peace not in forgetting the past, but in reclaiming it, their love didn't erase the pain, the scars, or the silence. But it turned what once bound them into something that could bless them. Because sometimes in the Wild West, survival wasn't just about holding on, it was about choosing what to hold on to. Thank you for journeying with us through this tale of redemption, courage, and quiet devotion.
Oh.
If stories like this touch your heart and stir your soul, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Echoes, where love rides farther than fear, and even the roughest trails can lead home. Hit that bell so you never miss the next tale. Until then, ride steady, love deep, and remember, where bullets missed, hearts didn't.